Okay, ladies, this screencast is going to start with D-Day, so depending on where your class got, y'all might actually be able to fast forward a good bit. So, as you know, D-Day is the event in which we will target the liberation of France. We will try to free France from German control. We had already gotten control of Italy at this point, and now we know that liberating France is the next big step. The big three, who are made up of Stalin, Churchill, and FDR, each representing their respective countries as seen on the screen. They will meet at the Tehran Conference, which is in Iran. But in Tehran, they will discuss their plans for the, Northern Europe invasion and the liberation of France as a means to, eventually get at Germany. And at this meeting, they decide that Dwight Eisenhower will be the commanding officer of this mission. And this D-Day mission is also, by the way, known as Operation Overlord, as you saw on the top of your outline, on the top of this PowerPoint. Okay. They will choose the location of invasion as the beaches of Normandy, France. But they are going to trick the Germans into thinking that they're actually targeting Pas-de-Calais, a different beachfront. And they basically use... they want to trick the Germans into thinking it's a different location so that Normandy will not be as well defended. And they use Hollywood, kind of prop tactics. They have blow up inflatable ships and tanks and dummy tanks and they target it they're going to invade from England because, you just have to cross the English Channel to get to France. So they put all these dummy props at the location of England that's right across from Pas-de-Calais instead of Normandy, making them kind of just trying to throw off the Germans a little bit. I'm just going to show you this picture. I'll come back to the screen, but if you see the 4 soldiers picking up this inflated tank that's totally fake because 4 men could not pick up an actual tank, obviously. Okay, so we use some trickery there. And we're going to use a special type of boat that was referenced earlier by myself, the Higgins Boats, produced out of New Orleans, that were made to be more amphibious because they were supposed to allow the boats to ramp up onto the land and drop the troops off without them having to wade in the water. And so the date of D-Day will actually be June 6th, 1944. And it will involve 2 different waves. There will be paratroopers flown in to France and dropped behind enemy lines to try to get control from behind the coastline of France, a little bit more into France. And then it will also involve seaborne soldiers. This is thousands and thousands. I don't know if I have a number here for you. No, don't worry about a number in terms of how many men are involved. We'll get to a number later on. But, they met some problems. There was really choppy seas, which created a lot of seasickness, and it was hard for the ships to get close to the beaches, and they received heavy fire from the Germans, both the paratroopers and the seaborne soldiers. So there will be high casualties. This just shows you some pictures of a satellite image of Normandy, and you can kind of see on the map here that France, where these units are moving in from. This is a picture of the Higgins Boats. Okay, so after a fair amount of fighting, after I think a week, the Allies were able to get control of the beach line of Normandy. And then after that full 7 days, they gained about an 80-mile stretch of land in France. I have these statistics here. Once they control such a coastline, such a wide coastline, now they're able to really ship over large numbers of soldiers and large amounts of supplies and war vehicles and weapons to be able to successfully take all of France. And so they will, within a month, because of that beach occupation, land 1 million troops, over 500,000 tons of supplies, and nearly 200,000 vehicles, as you see on the screen. Okay. And eventually, within the month, really 2 months, I should say, Paris is liberated, and Also, besides France now being liberated, since the capital was, Belgium and the country of Luxembourg were also liberated. So the Allies are successful at this first kind of takeover of Western Europe, and now, of course, the goal is to make it all the way inward into Germany and defeat Hitler. Okay, so by October of 1944, just for a statistic, okay, the Americans were able to capture their first German town. So they have actually made it into German territory, coming from the west, moving east into Germany, okay? This makes Hitler very nervous, and he wants to give it one last go to hold the Allies off, and that event is going to be with the Battle of the Bulge. So essentially, Hitler wants to regain the Belgian city called Antwerp, as spelled on the screen for you. Antwerp was a Belgian city, okay, so it's in Belgium, but it's a port city, and so by targeting like a port city, this would cut off supply lines for the Allies. They wouldn't be able to get in like ships and resources, so that's what he's trying to do. So German tanks will drive through 60 miles of enemy territory, which created a bulge in the line of defense. Don't stress about trying to understand the war strategy here. I just wanted you to know like why it's known as the Battle of the Bulge. It's the last big war effort by Hitler. But you can kind of see on the screen like how it's making a triangle. That means like as far left as that triangle point goes, that's how far back Germany was able to push forward with the Battle of the Bulge. Okay? Even though the Germans were able to make that ground, eventually the Germans will be pushed back after the battle's over, which does last about a month. So the Germans actually lost more territory. And by the end of it, the Germans had lost about 120,000 troops, 600 tanks and weapons, and 1,600 planes. That's like their resources that they just cannot replace at this point in the war. So they really have no hope of winning. And at this point, all the Nazis could do was retreat. Okay. VE Day is just going to be kind of talking about how the war is officially ended in Europe. So, October 44 is when Battle of the Bulge happens. By April of 45, just like, roughly 6 months later, the Soviet army coming from the east side was able to storm the capital of Berlin, Germany. Okay. So Hitler at this point is going to lose. And he knows that, so he's kind of in his underground headquarters, hiding out, and he's preparing for the end of the war. In an interesting turn of events, he actually chooses to marry his longtime girlfriend, Eva Braun, and he gives this proclamation to the German people via radio address. I die with a happy heart, aware of the immeasurable deeds of our soldiers. At the front, I myself and my wife choose to die in order to escape the disgrace of capitulation, which is just defeat and surrender. And so, the next day, Hitler and his wife will commit suicide, as well as some of his higher-up officials who were hiding out in the bunker with him. And then the Third Reich is eventually forced to surrender on May 8th, 1945, which is a day officially known as VE Day, which stands for Victory in Europe Day. Okay? I wanted to now transition to the fact that this war is only technically halfway won, because we have another enemy. Sorry, I'm stuttering. We have another enemy to focus on, and that is Japan. Obviously, there had been fighting at this point in Asia, in the Pacific, but we have not given the majority of our military resources to the Pacific at this time. So let's kind of talk about what had been going on, and then what eventually ends up happening with concluding the war in Japan as well. So island hopping is kind of the campaign or, method, military tactic that the Allies are using against the Japanese. This is how they are winning back their territory from Japan. This is not just like American territory. This is other Allied territory, such as like Vietnam or Papua New Guinea, Thailand, there's other places as well. But essentially, the Allies are kind of coming from the outskirts of the Pacific and those Asian islands and hopping and taking back island to island, making their way closer to Japan. With each island that the Allies hopped to, they were getting closer to the main island of Japan, where they eventually would plan for a large-scale Japanese invasion, okay? And they needed these islands to be able to make it closer to Japan to be able to launch an actual attack of Japan. They couldn't really launch an attack of Japan from boats like out in the Pacific Ocean. They needed to be closer. And you can kind of see on this map, like the outskirts, you see where Pearl Harbor is. That's too far for like a main assault or invasion of Japan. Just to give you some examples of like what battles were part of the island hopping campaign. Iwo Jima is a pretty famous one. It's like one of the fiercest battles of island hopping that of course ends with the Allies taking the peak of the island and raising the American flag as depicted in the statue you see. That is taking place at Mount Suribachi. You see them raising the flag there. That's the memorialized statue in D.C. Another example would be battle at Okinawa, which is another island, is moving closer to the island of Japan as part of the island hopping campaign. At Okinawa, there were heavy casualties, very heavy casualties, and even like over 100,000 Japanese casualties, just kind of proving that the Japanese people are not likely to surrender. Many of them would actually choose a ritualistic suicide instead of surrender, as that was considered more honorable. Surrender was very shameful. So the fact that we are losing lives ourselves, but that the Japanese are willing to go all in and be at risk for being killed themselves, is showing that if we choose to actually invade Japan, this war could last like a whole another year or more, and there would probably be like over 1 million casualties, because the Japanese would not be moved easily to surrender, even if it became certain that they would be defeated. And that will lead us to the Plan B approach, which is going to be where we introduce the Manhattan Project. Okay, so the Manhattan Project is something that the United States was working on. It was a science research project. We were working on it during World War II, and this, of course, focuses on the creation of the atomic bomb. It is the best kept secret of World War II. Americans did not know that the U.S. government was working on this project. The Vice President, Truman, did not even know about this project until he himself became president. The lead physicist on this project was Dr. Robert Oppenheimer, as you see him pictured on the screen on the right, bottom right, okay? And he was the lead on the project, but there were, over 500,000 Americans that had a hand in this project that very few knew about, okay? And again, the whole point of the project is the creation of a nuclear weapon, because such thing did not exist prior to this point. By mid-1945, the American scientists involved were ready to test the first model, and so they did such in the deserts of New Mexico. And such a big flash was seen that it could be seen from hundreds of miles away, and there was a big roar of thunder and a huge mushroom cloud of smoke, and it was successful. Now, keep in mind, they targeted an area that was not populated, so there were not citizens living in this region that was targeted with the atomic bomb. Okay. Truman is now the new president, as FDR has passed away right before VE Day. Okay, FDR passed away right before VE Day. So Truman is the vice president. He becomes president to finish out FDR's term, which is actually going to be like 4 years long because FDR died very soon into his 4th term. And Truman's given information on the Manhattan Project, and now he has a decision to make because the military has provided a Plan B. And if you do not want to engage in a large-scale invasion of Japan that would involve potentially 1 million casualties and costless, or very costly resources and money, we can choose to use this super powerful weapon that has not been seen before. And it will be up to Truman to make that decision. And as you may know, he does choose to go forward with the bombing. And by the end of it, we will have not used 1 but 2 bombs on 2 Japanese cities. And I will continue talking about those bombings in the next screencast, as I will have to record over the 15-minute limit. Please write down any questions you have and be sure to watch the remaining part of our story.